Hey, Carlos. Can you hear me? You are in mute. You are still in mute.
I can hear you. I can hear
Very
you.
good. Yeah. It's great to see you.
Well, running.
Okay, great. So we can see here your lecture, Carlos.
Can you see the mouse?
Yeah, we can see the mouse as well.
Thank you.
So just a few words before starting. First of all, thank you everyone that joined this new refractive surgery basics webinar series that we start with the first episode on how to get the best of the Galilei device. This webinar and all the next episode have as the main objective of getting something very practical for a refractive surgeon, but also for people learning, residents and fellow in the field. And for that, we wanted to have the best speaker and the best expert in the field. So Carlos was an evidence for us, for those who know him. Carlos is a refractive and corneal specialist. He's working in both in the private eye clinic of Sausas in Campinas, but also in the hospital of Sorocabas, if I'm saying that right. He's an old friend from many years, and he's a really brilliant expert and what I used to call a scientist of topography. So Carlos, I'm very, very happy, and I think we are all very honored to have you tonight talking about your knowledge and sharing your knowledge with us about the Galilei device. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, David. It is an honor for me to begin these sessions. And I know other very important people around the world will join you. I hope to have the opportunity to be also with you in next webinars. Today, we are going to see something about the Galilei, my financial disclosures, and I want to thank the collaborators during all these years working at the Federal University of Sao Paulo, the Sorocaba Hospital, and iBank. Galilei has Placido and Scheinflug, but to say that is too simple. We have to understand that elevation is derived by algorithm, and curvature may be derived by algorithm when we get only elevation. In other words, from Placido, we get curvature and we can get elevation. And from Scheinflug, we get elevation, but we can get curvature. It's a two-way highway, mathematical. Placido alone is the standard in corneal topography and is still the most sensitive method to assess the curvature of the anterior surface of the cornea. However, Placido alone is not enough because does not assess posterior surface and pachymetry, for example. Scheinflug system is an optical tomography of the anterior segment of the eye, and we can assess many other data from this kind of technology. However, Scheinflug tomography, to detect differences in curvature, need difference in elevation. And to distinguish 1/4 of diopter, we need a resolution of less than 1 micron, 1 micron. So Scheinflug tomography alone is not enough. While Placido has much more resolution, Scheinflug smooths the corneal surface and therefore is blind to tears. The scales has to have small steps producing continuous colors in degradé instead to better well-defined steps which facilitate the map interpretation a lot. Galilei combines, and not only combines, integrates real curvature from Plácido and real elevation from Scheinflug. This makes their system unique. And presently, we have optical biometry by interferometry and reflectometry. So we have what the company, the manufacturers call all-in-one, the Galilei G6 Lens Professional, which is probably the most advanced system and technology to cover all this area. Galilei integrates data from 2 Plácidos and 2 Scheinflug images simultaneous, and data alignment can be centered to the first Purkinje or to the pupil. Wavefront can be aligned to the white to white, the corneal diameter, or to actually any point in the cornea. The Galilei describes the first Purkinje as the center of the 4 dots, which are reflected in the cornea. Devices like you are going to hear in next webinars, okay, do not have reflect from the cornea. So I don't know how they discover where is the Purkinje, okay, because the center of the 2 red crosshairs here is not the Purkinje, it's the line of fixation, which not necessarily is the same than the line of sight. Apex is another thing important to recognize. Apex is the most anterior point in the primary position of the eye. And apex is a reference in the z-axis. So it's impossible to be detected under the microscope of the slit lamp. And the Galilei has iris recognition in order to compensate cyclotorsion and to have the real position of every optical slit taken by the system. Galilei has a system of compensation of parallaxia. These are images produced by me when the camera was moved. So you can see very clear in the image A that the camera, the image which is closer to the camera looks thicker than the image which is farther. This can be measured. And from this measure, we can get an average and to get much better pachymetry because both Scheinflug images are made simultaneously. This is something like this. To simplify the question, to produce ray tracing in different optical media, we can understand it like a pencil inside a cup of water. If you take a photo from one side, you get the image from the right. If you take the photo from the other side, you get the image from the left. From both images made simultaneously, we can get this and to reproduce exactly where is the right place where the pencil is. So taking measurements. One of the things I gave to the Galilei since 2009 is the scale and what I call the CGA strategy, which codify the color steps of all scales. So absolute scales were fixed with the yellow in one number, one recognized number. The yellow in curvature, anterior curvature will be 47. In thickness, we put the yellow step in 500. In elevation will be between 10 and 15. And for the posterior surface will be in minus 6.75. With this, we get in the Galilei, everything what is green will be normal range. Everything what is yellow will be, you are in your borderline, in the limit. Everything what is orange will be risk factor in every map. Red will be pathological, the most times will be pathological, and the blue will be the opposite. When we are talking about curvature, red will be steeper and blue will be flat. If we are talking about pachymetry, red will be thin and blue will be thick. And this is very clear in this table. Is the last table I prepared with the last scale and modifications. And so the color means a lot. We are not dependent of the number and the value because the number and the value is linked to the color in order to make very easy to understand the maps. These are anterior surface from untouched corneas. All have normal range, but it's totally different, the pattern. Pattern linked with colors will give you immediately what is happening in the cornea. In the first cornea, we have bow tie, symmetric bow tie in green. In the second, we already have the same bow tie, but in yellow and with more steps in colors, so it's more multifocal. The third one will be asymmetric because we have the yellow at the bottom and not at the top. The fourth, we have a bow tie, horizontal bow tie, which means that the steeper curvature is horizontal and not vertical. And the last image is a very irregular cornea, probably due to tears or something in the ocular surface. In the second line, we have modified corneas, either by LASIK, but off-center, but hyperopic LASIK in the middle, warpage, or this is radial keratotomy, an image with a donut, a circle, a ring there. And in the third line, we have already corneas, a cornea that many people would classify as keratoconus, but it's not because this patient has not ectasia, and the other four with different types of ectasia and keratoconus or pellucid. These corneas are totally green, and only two here, one here in axial and tangential are with a little yellow. Means that in range curvature, all these corneas have normality and probably has not ectasia. But at the same time, we can see and we must see the pattern. If the pattern is symmetric here in green arrows, asymmetric in yellow arrows, or irregular in light blue arrows. So we have to join not only the color, but also the pattern we are observing to understand what happened in that surface. Another is the kind of a scale, okay? We use 1 diopter scale. Many people want to use 0.5 scale. There is no need to that. With 1 diopter scale, we are going to see perfectly the asymmetries, the important asymmetries, because since the time of Rabinovich, we know that 1.5, 1.7 diopters in vertical asymmetry is what is important pre-refractive, is in pre-refractive screening. And with this scale, we have a real view of what is happening, and not, for example, using an absolute scale where the yellow is in 45.5. So introducing an orange that should not be there because it's not above the normal range or the normal limit, or perhaps using 0.5 scales, introducing red colors which are false positives, or relative scales. With relative scales, you cannot compare one today exam with tomorrow exam, because a relative scale depends on what is at the top and the bottom, and pre-surgery, after surgery will change completely the range of values we have in each cornea. And this is a normal anterior axial map without ectasia, but with a superior asymmetry. Another example about scales and new maps and new presentations we have in the Galilei is this case. This case is a young girl, now is around 34 years old, that I follow for presently more than 10, 12 years, okay? And originally it was classified as keratoconus, despite the thickness is perfect, and both BFS, anterior and posterior best fit sphere maps were normal, completely normal. All the indices were normal. And this is the classic display you are going to get in many and practically all the devices. So, and this is overcome and is totally insufficient. In 2015, we present in Istanbul in ECRS winter the new way to present Galilei with a refractive display, which is the anterior axial, posterior axial, the total corneal power map, and the posterior BFS, okay? And we see that we have a very symmetric, with the rule, astigmative in the anterior and the posterior surface. And the asymmetries display where we show the tangential, the both anterior and posterior best fit toric aspheric, and the pachymetry map. And you can see that in the best fit toric aspheric maps, there is completely green at the center. So we cannot discover a bump. A bump in Spanish is called chinchón, when a kid hits the head and produce a bump, a lump in the head. That's what we need in the cornea in order to have the diagnosis of keratoconus and ectasia. And this patient may have steepening, but is not a hyperprolacticity, and there is not a bump, neither thinning of the cornea, or more, there is not asymmetry of the cornea. So this is not keratoconus. This is what we call now pre-keratoconus type 1 without ectasia. The curvature maps makes us easy to discover when we observe anterior and posterior curvature maps, what happened in the cornea. After radial keratotomy, we have both surfaces affected, but after myopic LASIK, we only have the anterior surface affected and the posterior is still normal. Or we recognize when we have an off-center treatment, like in this case. Many of these cases came to me with suspecting ectasia. And this is not ectasia, this is a treatment that was made totally off center or something happened during the surgery. Okay, we are collecting cases of this, and recently we got one case with posterior polymorph for dystrophy, and another case coming from, that case comes from United States, but the other from Argentina, also a case similar like this, but with Fuchs dystrophy. So we call this prekeratoconus type 2 or posterior keratoconus, but it maybe means that we have to search much more the endothelium and what happened in the clinical history, family history, if we have some kind of posterior dystrophy. Curvature maps presently using the tangential map or instantaneous in 10 millimeters and with a scale called CGA 1 diopter German, okay, which has more steps. We began to discover that the cornea may be not only steeper and protruded with a lump in the center, but it can be also stretched and flattened in the periphery. So we began to discover corneas, normal corneas without peripheral flattening, and it's very rare, but still we get a few of this with peripheral flattening in practically normal corneas at the center. But this sign, this new sign of keratoconus is more frequent in keratoconus than in normal corneas. Observe, and it was hiding and was missed because the type of scales we were using. Look at these cases, 9 millimeters tangential and 9 millimeters anterior axial, and what is the same case, only modifying the scale and with 10 millimeters. The ectasia is not that size at the left. The ectasia is only this small side, like a peak of a baby bottle, okay? And surrounded, but what I call the Brazilian flag sign, which is yellow and green, surrounded the red of the ectasia here or in the other. This kind of sign we began to apply with corneal biomechanics, and we understand that the cornea is stronger at the periphery and weaker at the center, like exactly in this case, like a bridge, which is anchored to the earth. The cornea is anchored to the limbus. So it's stronger. And when the cornea goes forward, it's stretching and the tissue is more compact and thicker in the periphery. So this is a novel sign for progression that we are evaluating. And we had this preliminary study made in 2018 at the hospital. In green, you can see the normal corneas, and in red, the keratoconus corneas with 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 quadrants is evident, and this was statistically significant. So after the visit to our hospital of Herminder Dua, we began to try to correlate this finding, topographic finding, with the dual layer. And it happened that we presented this paper in ECRS and in 2018, and ASCARS in 2018 got the best paper of session. I'm sorry, the video seems not to work. I was not able to produce the video. okay? But the lesson here to take home is that the tip of the needle to inject the air has to be in the Brazilian flag sign here in the yellow, green, and beginning the dark blue area, okay? If you inject the air in the light blue zone, you are going to have more resistance to the air and much more chances to the air to go down and detach the decimen. We have almost 100% big bubble 1 or mixed when we inject far from the thinnest point and in the yellow-green area of the pachymetry and the tangential map like this. We have several cases now, but this sign also allowed us to make a Galilei customized, selective, Galilei guided cross-linking, because we can identify the real area with ectasia. We don't need to flat what is already flat in the cornea. We are treating too much cornea. And what we do, since we have a system that is not selecting the energy in each place, we don't need to do that. When we use a contact lens with UV filter, we refine the lens and we cover the area we don't want to treat. These are cases, 2 cases, 24 hours and 48 hours. Presently, my post-op, the cornea is completely epithelialized in 3 days, while the regular method is in 4 or 5 days. Recovery and pain is much faster and less in this kind. We can talk about the method here, but later is not the case in this lecture. But also, we already have several cases of radial keratotomy made customized selective Galilei only in the elbow of the incisions, which is represented by this red-orange donut around the flat area, which produce the hyperopia in these patients. But a fluctuation of the refraction is produced by this ring, which the intraocular pressure pushes forward or not. So we make these corneas more stable. And presently, I suggest to do this kind of treatment before cataract surgery in order to have more stable refraction for our patients. Recovery is very, very fast, as you can see. Galilei helped me because in my private eye clinic at the hospital I have, but in my private eye clinic, I don't have OCT. So I use the Galilei to follow up the treatment. You can see the Scheimpflug, colorized Scheimpflug image pre, 1 week, 1 month, and 12 months after the treatment where everything was recovered. And then the cornea begins to flatten. Curvature maps made the Galilei to be the first to show the total corneal power map by ray tracing. In this case, after a refractive surgery. What we have to use to calculate the IOLs after refractive surgery is the total corneal power data and not the anterior or the addition or the simple addition of anterior and posterior data. But very, very interesting. Very recently, we began to describe the total corneal power maps. And we have different kinds of total corneal power maps, which are very, very useful. Remember that this map doesn't mean curvature. These maps represent how the light rays cross and focus after crossing the cornea. So we have almost monofocal, toric monofocal, multifocal, toric multifocal, skewed, multifocal, toric, post-LASIK with some decentration. This third case in the second line is with neovascularization and the limbus after contact lens use, or the last one is after pterygium surgery, okay? And of course, we may have very irregular corneas with an optics. This map represents the optics of the cornea. So I will challenge anybody who wants to implant a multifocal premium IOL in this kind of corneas. But now with these maps, we have a very easy way to see how is the optics of the cornea. So we can decide objectively, okay, if we wish to go to a patient with 20/20 happy and not 20/20 very unhappy. So the best map to decide multifocal IOL implantation is the total corneal power map, okay? And with this map, we began to discover this kind of deformation. This is a kind of functional deformation, not as the pattern is representing how the optics is. So everybody who is more than 40 years old and use multifocal glasses, if we can make a functional tomography of those glasses, we are going to see the channel of vision of the multifocality. This is exactly what happened in the cornea. You can see here the normal asymmetric cornea in pellucid or in keratoconus. This is very important because there's asymmetry and there's a total corneal power multifocal channel of vision is very related with the asymmetry in the shape of the cornea represented by curvature or elevation maps at the top and the wavefront of the cornea in the total corneal coma. So this probably explains how many keratoconus patients can see at different refractions because and can read and can see by far because they can see by different points in the cornea. So now we go exactly to what David asked me to do. How to do the screening with Galilei for keratoconus or for pre-refractive surgery. To do this, we have to understand what are the signs of keratoconus. Main signs of keratoconus are, first, ectasia of protrusion, the peak of the baby bottle or the lump in the cornea, asymmetry or irregularity. We are not telling the same when we measure the height of the Pisa Tower in Italy and if we measure how tilted is the Pisa Tower, are completely different. The height will represent probably the ectasia, but the tilting will represent the asymmetry, are not the same parameter. And we have to measure each one in different way by different indices. And the third, that in keratoconus, in my opinion, is consequence of the dilatation of the cornea, and the cornea which is pushed forward is the central thinning in comparison to periphery. It's not the same to say, that we have a uniform thin cornea, that we have a thinned cornea at the center because it was pushed forward. So how Galilei may identify this, we are going to review this in the next half an hour or less. First is ectasia, by steepening the hyperprolaticity with the Q factor or epsilon square, and mainly the formation of the lump observed by the posterior BFS maximum. Keratometry is a good parameter to follow up the keratoconus, to standardize cross-linking treatment, for example, but it's not the best way to discover very early cases. We may have a cornea with 50, but without keratoconus because has not ectasia. Epsilon square or asphericity Q factor, which in Galilei is 8 millimeters at the anterior and the posterior surface. And the epsilon square has rock curves relative well, okay? We have to say that epsilon square is the same than to say minus Q, okay? And these rock curves will tell us how well is the index we are going to study. The perfect index will be this vertical line go to 100, no false negative, and the line goes horizontal completely, no false positives. And the most important index is the best fit sphere, okay? And not the best fit sphere only. The best fit sphere is the ideal surface, the ideal curvature in 8 millimeters, okay? It's the average of curvature in 8 millimeters. We compare every point in the cornea against this curvature, this average curvature. And what is the most important index we discover is the maximum best fit sphere, which is the tallest point in the cornea. Is to understand how works this is to compare our football ball against the American football ball, which is not a ball. Actually, I'm sorry, my friends, American friends, but your ball is actually an egg. And you don't play with the feet, you play with the hand. So making a little fun of this, and I am a Gator, I study at the University of Florida, okay, is like to compare a football ball against a hand egg ball, okay? And if we compare these two shapes, we are going to have a very difference in the peak of the American football ball. So this, how tall is this peak is what is going to give us the notion and the knowledge of how tall is the mounting of the peak of the baby bottle. Imagine a mountain, and in my native country, Peru, we have many of these terraces in the mountains. So the terrace, which is at the top, will be the maximum best fit sphere. And every terrace here will be the steps we see in the best fit sphere maps. So what we have to understand, if there is or there is not ectasia, we have to answer how tall is the mountain. So best fit sphere is the mean curvature in the central 8 millimeters. And the best fit sphere maximum quantifies the height of the ectasia. And in Galilei, typically, we have this kind of pattern in the best fit sphere maps anterior or posterior, easily observed in the posterior before the anterior. And this pattern, which is like a peninsula, okay, I call it sunny side, Fry-Eck, okay? So because it looks like that. I'm sorry for all the other devices, but it is difficult to see elevation maps. It's not only, the point is not only to see the numbers. We have to understand very fast, very easy, the pattern and immediately recognize when we have the possibility to have an ectasia. So to understand the Galilei BF-fit sphere map, we see here a normal posterior surface and astigmatic, in which the egg is lying down. So the steeper axis is vertical and the flatter axis is horizontal. But this is normal. In Galilei, you should look for always the green in the center, in the 4.4 millimeters diameter center. Okay, if you begin to have the yellow at the center, that probably means that the ectasia begins to be formed. Okay, and this is a Fry-Eck pattern that you can see in a keratoconus, like an iceberg. The peak of the iceberg is surrounded by the lake or the sea around, because what is protruded is only the peak of the keratoconus there. So highest the number here, highest the elevation will be the more protruded the lump or the ectasia. And many people look for facilities. Galilei was, God had some infame because, oh, too complicated, it's difficult to understand. No, the Galilei is much simpler than many other devices, okay? And more important, is much more precise and with better resolution, okay? In this device, for example, and probably because it's aligned to the apex, our friends, Renato Ambrosio from Rio and Professor Belling created the BAD, Belling-Ambrosio display. And to those who use this device, okay, the cutoff values for the anterior surface is 7 micron, and for the posterior surface is 16 micron. With that, we begin to see a simulated color, yellow or red, at the center, okay? This is wonderful to see only ectasia. How tall is the ectasia? But tells nothing, absolutely nothing about asymmetry. How tall is the Pisa Tower, but know how tilted is the Pisa Tower, okay? Together with pachymetry analysis, it makes this system very strong. We are going to see this, what happened with the Galilei. With the cutoff value with the Galilei, simple Galilei best fit sphere without enhancing anything, okay? And look at the rock curves here is exactly the same, exactly the same. So we have now in the maps, when we have green at the center in anterior or posterior best fit sphere, we have green as normal, no lump, no ectasia. When we begin to have this kind of semicircles, progressive semicircles, and we have the limit of the anterior surface will be 10 microns. It means the first yellow. And for the posterior surface will be 15.7 microns. It means the second yellow. So it's very simple. If you see two yellows within this gray circle at the center, you in the anterior surface, you already have the mountain taller than what you should expect in normal corneas. If you have 3 yellows here, 3 steps, okay, you already have taller than what you expect for the posterior surface. Okay, so patterns and colors means a lot in all maps of Galilei. And as I used to say, Galilei has good and does need bad, because good means Galilei optimized ocular display. Would be too much pretentious to say God, Galilei optimized display only. So I better put a second O for good. Galilei is good, it's not bad. So the second feature of keratoconus is asymmetry. And Galilei is perfect to do and to see asymmetry. Asymmetry in Placido topography and in the Galilei is recognized by the patterns. But patterns may be affected by different things. An asymmetric pattern doesn't need the same than to have ectasia or to have a lump. We have asymmetry after refractive surgery, okay, and we have asymmetry with ectasia. In 2008, we presented this paper with Orbiscan, and with the Orbiscan, the prototype of all the rest of devices that came later, okay, we were able to move the data. And all these maps come from the same cornea. We only moved the data. Observe, 1 millimeter to the left, 1 millimeter to the right, to the top, and to the left. Okay, so the pattern in letter H is evidently asymmetric, but the pattern in letter I is very symmetric. And if we are going to implant rings in this cornea, we have to know exactly how we are measuring the cornea, because if we measure to the apex, and the apex is the most anterior point in the cornea, and in deformed corneas, this apex is not at the center, okay, is dislocated mostly inferiorly. So we probably are observing a map with a false asymmetry when we use devices aligned to the apex. So in the Galilei, aligned to the first Purkinje or to the pupil, we have an Rabinovitz index, we have a KPI and K-prof, keratoconus prediction index or keratoconus probability. The KPI is a soup of letters here, a bunch of indices forming the KPI, and the limit should be around 20%. Okay, and we now have also the CLMI, or cone location at magnitude index, which first discover where is the K-max in the map and compares with the antipode, a point at the same distance and the same meridian. The cutoff value is around 1.5, 1.72. And CLMI and KPI, look at this rock curves, almost, they are very, very good, almost perfect, either for suspects or for keratoconus patients. This is from 2 studies, one in Colombia and one in Kuala Lumpur. Okay, and they have very good sensitivity and specificity. There are no significant difference between them. So these indices are very, very useful to discover very early keratoconus. However, they are not good for progression of keratoconus because all the stages of keratoconus may have very high index. So the other index, and this is another part of my work, my collaboration to topography, is the best fit toric aspheric maps. In the best fit toric aspheric maps, we use the BFS as 0 value at the center of the map. And beginning from that, we begin to see how the surface changes in curvature in comparison to the 0, okay? So minus 12 here will be 12 microns below the best fit sphere, and 27 positive here will be 27 above the 0, or it means the best fit sphere. And we see here how tilted is the cornea. So in 2009, I described it, and I began to use what I call the Kranemann-Arce index, either anterior or AKA or posterior PKI, okay? And this index that is actually very useful, but is dependent of the alignment. Probably the reason why some devices don't have a good best fit toric ellipsoid or best fit toric aspheric index is because they are aligning the data to the peak of the mountain, to the apex, and not to the side, to the pupil, or to the Purkinje. These images come from my original work in ACRS and ECRS in 2010, okay? And the anterior AKA is the comparison between the more depressed point and the more elevated point in the map, either anterior or posterior surface. And these indices correlate very well with the total corneal coma, as we see here. It happened that in 2010, I went to teach the people at Cleveland Clinic with under Ron Kruger. My well friend Ron Kruger was our coordinator today, Professor Dr. David Smadja. Marconi, great friend, and Glauco Melo from Curitiba. And also David at that time was coming from Bordeaux Clinic, Central Clinic of Keratoconus in France, with Professor Joseph Collin, who passed away, and the present chairman, David Tobol. Well, they decided to study that index I created in 2009, November 2009, and they went much farther than me. And they got the Truman Award for the best paper in Journal Refractive Surgery in 2013. And later, more papers coming from David showed that combining this index with the corneal volume, they got this kind of specificity and sensitivity. It's incredible. I never imagined how far this index was going, okay? And David prepared a decision tree for Zimmer, and this is happening normal and not probably frustrous keratoconus when the AAI, that's the name, aspheric asymmetric index, David called my PK, okay, less than 20 microns, and the volume is good, more than 30.8. This is what happened in cases with more than 21 with still good volume, is a frustrum, or what happened when the volume and the asymmetry are abnormal. So announcing that this cornea may have frustrated keratoconus. Unfortunately, this display is not presently in the Galilei because when it was going to be validated, With that, I used it for the CLMIX. It didn't work well. And in my opinion, is because alignment. We have to repeat all this, David. Unfortunately, it's a lot of work what we have to repeat with different alignments in order to establish that 21 microns maybe is not the best number. I personally use in the fault maps of Galilei 29 microns. So the next index will be cell cone location and magnitude index plus, or X, okay? And you can see the three populations which made the validation of this study in Colombia with Luke Koch, and in Houston, and in Switzerland with Professor Fru. And the normal will be a cornea with less than 0.25, suspect between 0.25 and 0.880, and keratoconus with more than 0.80. This is the representation of a display with 6 maps: anterior axial, posterior axial, anterior instantaneous, posterior instantaneous, pachymetry map, and posterior best fit sphere elevation map. The combination and the algorithm combining these asymmetric indices, pachymetry indices, and protrusion indices like Kmax produce a number. We already have the knowledge that is false negative is very rare, very extremely rare. False positive are possible in cases that are not actually keratoconus, but false negative is very extremely rare. This is a case with 0, despite the posterior surface has some orange in the map, and the pachymetry is already in yellow in 500 or less, 593. This is a suspect, despite we have orange here, because we don't have the formation of the lamp in the posterior BFS, and we don't have thinning of the cornea. And this is a positive case already with keratoconus, with a steepening, hyperprolaticity, a thinner cornea at the center with faster progression, and burned egg. This is not like a fry egg. This is already the kind of egg I used to cook when I began to be free of my family in the United States. Okay, central thinning is the third sign, important sign of what happened in keratoconus. And we have to understand that the thinning may not happen symmetrically. In 2009, we discovered this other new sign with the Galilei, which is a thickening of the bottom in some keratoconus corneas. This is product of an asymmetric thinning. The thinning of the cornea goes temporal inferior, but why the bottom is thicker? Probably because less viscosity of the cornea and a phenomenon that I call corneal creep, the displacement of the collagen lamellas to the bottom when the cornea is smashed every time the lids blink. So the thickening of the cornea or the thickness progression may be asymmetric. And this is the way I prefer to see the pachymetry maps now in 10 millimeters. And you can see that there is a last row of numbers exactly at 9 millimeters from the center. So if we have 10 steps of 20 micron each step, it means 200 microns of difference between the thinnest point and the 9 millimeters row, okay, we already have a thickness progression ratio larger than 45 microns per millimeter, which is our limit of normal progression of pachymetry. So with the pachymetry map and with this scale, when we begin to see the light blue color at the periphery, we have to suspect that there is already a faster progression of pachymetry. If there is the yellow or orange at the center and light blue in the periphery, of course, there is a very fast progression. But sometimes we may begin with 520. But if we end with 760, we already have 240 microns of difference. So we may begin with normal range of pachymetry at the center, but ending with very thick cornea at the periphery, we are going to have a faster progression of pachymetry. How else we can see this? In an old paper we had, we produced these graphics. We observed that the thinnest point in keratoconus tends to go temporal inferior. And we discovered that if we have 1 millimeter dislocation from pupil center and less than 500 microns, means asymmetric keratoconus, all the cases were keratoconus until demonstrate against. So only these two parameters, 1 millimeter dislocation and less than 500 microns, is already representing keratoconus cases. When we have more than 200 microns, this is confirmed. So presently, and only for a few people, we have, and of course, in the new software, hopefully this year, is coming the Galilei corneal pachymetry analysis. Okay, so no other devices have as complete analysis of pachymetry as we are going to have in the Galilei. See how is the prototype of the display. We have graphics, like in other devices. We have the TPI and the art value that is in validation. And we also going to have this spatial map. This spatial map is a map of corneal thickness progression. Zero is in zero progression, is in blue. The limit is in yellow, and orange, red will mean faster progression of pachymetry. And we can see that the progression not necessarily is uniform in 360 degrees. For 360 degrees, we already have this kind of graphic, okay? That since this cornea is normal, the graphic is finishing in the vertical line of the graphic. So let's see normal corneas with different pattern. This is a normal cornea with a normal pachymetry and normal progression. This is a thick, very thick cornea with the light blue in the periphery, but with normal progression. You can see that the graphic ends at the vertical line. But we began to discover very strange corneas that in other devices, due to the shape of the graphic, which is steeper in the second half, will be a false positive. This is a completely normal cornea, that the progression is very flat at the beginning and steeper in the periphery, so finishing in the red and in the map. So I know very well this cornea for many years. Is my secretary. And we can distinguish normal corneas with thin cornea, which ends in green, and the graphic ends in the vertical, or normal, apparently thin cornea that we don't know if it's normal or not, but finishing in orange. And look the graphic. The graphic is already finishing in the horizontal line, indicating that the second half of this graphic is steeper. So we have now this cornea different than this one. This cornea is finite. Instead, the first cornea is uniformly thin cornea. The third will have 508 at the thinnest and is already with keratoconus. And of course, when we have very thin cornea, less than 500, and in this case, the map finished at the periphery with different colors because we have scars in this cornea. So there is not a uniform thickening going to the periphery. Observe this kind of irregular, very irregular cornea in radial keratotomy that may look as false positive for ectasia or for keratoconus in this kind of analysis. So we have to see also for pre-refractive screening the risk factor of the, if we have risk factors for keratoconus or for postoperative ectasia. We already have 1 hour, David. We are going to have a little bit more as you allow it me. So, and our present challenge is not to discover normal or diseased corneas, but to distinguish which cornea is with and which cornea is without risk factors. So we have another card, ACE, in the sleeve, and this is the PTA with the Galilei. The PTA comes from Marconi and also with the collaboration of David, and is a great, great index of in telling us the risk of ectasia postoperatively. I'm going to talk very little because I know Marconi will talk about this later in different sessions, different webinars. So let's show this example. It's -5 spheric, and with thin cornea, we have 491. Can we do surgery in this cornea? This is the CLMI X with 0. There is not keratoconus here. So if we apply the PTA, we already have 40 for the conventional PTA, 41 for the thinnest PTA, but 69 for the new algorithm, which is applied for corneas with very thin corneas. Okay, so of course, we cannot do LASIK with 120 micron flap in this cornea. Even with 100 flap, it was not possible. So is the only thing we can do? No, we can go for 100 with femto. No way. It's still with 60%, and despite the other indices that we can calculate by calculator, manual calculator, will be 36, 37. But for thin corneas, there is a special PTA, and in this case is 60%. Okay, I cannot do LASIK, but I can do PRK. PRK will have 26%. Okay, I am very conservative, and in very few patients, I do surgery with less than 500, but in this case, we did it, and the patient was well after applying, fortunately. So These are the three main features of keratoconus, okay? And now we have to see what are the corneas with signs of keratoconus, but without ectasia. Yes, to have an asymmetric cornea with normal range of curvature and without ectasia, without other hyperprolaticity, that is not keratoconus, it's only asymmetric cornea, okay? We have very steep corneas without ectasia. We have very thin corneas without ectasia. So now we begin to call and to describe these corneas as prekeratoconus. And this is explained by the different forces we may have in the cornea and how the cornea is deformed. The normal cornea can go forward, or the normal cornea can be deformed with the belly bottom at the belly at the bottom here. So we may have a very symmetric, steeper corneas, but without lump, and asymmetric corneas also without lump. These are corneas that we can call now prekeratoconus, and we should study this kind of corneas separately to have the behavior of them after surgery or with time. When we have both components, steepening, asymmetry, and beginning the fried egg pattern and the yellow pattern at the center of the BFS map, then we have keratoconus. So this is the prekeratoconus type 1. It's a very steep bow tie, either in anterior or posterior axial and tangential maps. Most of these cases has good pachymetry, and there is not evidence of a lump in the posterior BFS elevation map. And you can see in the BFTA maps that there is not asymmetry. There is a little bit of coma, and curiously, in this case, we have a faster progression of pachymetry. So progression of pachymetry doesn't mean that we have keratoconus. This case is stable for more than 10 years, and the sister is almost very stable for a long, long time. This is another case coming from my friend Eduardo Miranda in Curitiba. Observe, everybody would interpret this cornea as keratoconus. But look this cornea. This is a cornea that ends in light blue, but begins also very thick. So there is no faster progression. There is some asymmetry in the BFTA, and there is the insinuation of fried egg pattern in the posterior BFS. However, how tall is the mountain here? It's only 11 microns. So the limit, the cutoff is 16, 17. So this cornea may go to keratoconus. Perhaps we didn't know until we discovered another exam made 5 years before. And you can see the comparative axial map, completely green. So this cornea during the last 5 years is exactly the same. I know some people in Quito, Ecuador, did surgery, did PRK or PRK with cross-linking in this kind of corneas, especially to reduce the high astigmatism these corneas used to have. I have one cornea with rings, 2 symmetric rings, because it was a lot of anisometropy between both eyes, So I put rings to two segments, and the cornea with this kind of pattern began with, instead to 6 diopters of a cylinder, only with 0.5 diopter of cylinder. So the patient is very happy because now she can use glasses with the right correction in both eyes. And actually, I observed that girl since she had 6 years old, now is almost 25 years old. This is the type 2 of keratoconus, when the anterior surface is completely normal, but the posterior surface looks like steeper and hyperprolate, also with a bump here or with asymmetry. Okay, but if you study only the anterior surface and you never see the posterior curvature maps, like in the Galilei, in other devices, you cannot see this kind of maps because the scale is inverted. Okay, or this other case coming from my friend Noé Rivera. This is another one case with the anterior surface is still within normal range because there is not even yellow here, okay? And the total corneal power is multifocal, very concentric. However, in the posterior surface, we already have a very clear asymmetry with the fried egg pattern in the posterior map and with asymmetry in the BFTA map, and the cornea is a yes, I would implant toric IOL here, and even probably a multifocal toric in this case, because this TCP map, total corneal power map, is showing me that the multifocality of this cornea is very irregular. Of course, I have to know that this cornea is not going to progress. So perhaps cross-linking might be done before. Another case of prekeratoconus is with peripheral flattening. This is a normal cornea, in this case, thin cornea with peripheral flattening. And the question right now is the peripheral flattening announcing us that the normal cornea is going to be protruded at the center? We don't know yet. We are looking for very young people with this that we can progress with the age. But this is completely normal, only has a little thin cornea as around 495. Here we have another very interesting case. This is the regular anterior tangential map with the arrow, and this is the modified map at 10 millimeters. It's clearly with flattening at the periphery. This is an ophthalmologist, Dr. Harumi Burga from Peru, who allowed me to present this case because she was diagnosed with initial keratoconus in the past with other devices, and she has not keratoconus. She has a little yellow at the center, but not the Friedrich pattern. She has some asymmetry in the BFTA, but has not a lump here, and you have only astigmatic toric cornea at the center with a stretching in the periphery. So also another kind of prekeratoconus is very thin corneas. As we saw in the thickness progression report of Galilei, we can discover this very easily. We have a thin cornea around 490, 500, but the rest is completely normal, okay? Only toric cornea. Then we have the type 5B, which is normal thickness progression, okay? Here, the spot is thin, but without the lump, But in this case, we have peripheral flattening. And also, we may have the 5C pattern with much thinner cornea at the center without ectasia, okay, without ectasia, with peripheral flattening, and also with faster progression of pachymetry. Okay, so with this, we begin to understand that we have corneas that have part of the signs of keratoconus, but they don't have ectasia. With Galilei, we don't have the bad Belling-Ambroso display because we don't need it. Our numbers in base fit sphere are enough to have the same result, the same analysis, the same thinking that the Belling-Ambroso can give to you. But further than that, we don't only discover when we already have a lump, when we already have ectasia. With description of these cases, we can tell now very well. With the Galilei, we can discover before the ectasia happens in the cornea, despite we have other signs typically of keratoconus. And with the CLMI-X, when we have a cornea in zero and the other cornea of the same patient is positive, like in this case, we have frustrous keratoconus. You can observe here that if the CLMI-X are the 6 maps with the analysis of the best fit toric aspheric maps, with the thickness progression map, and with the coma map, we complete the analysis of this cornea very well. And we may have that we have some signs here, but still there is a false, there is negative here. This is a typical frustrate keratoconus. it's not subjectively. This is objective measurement of frustal keratoconus. And in the bottom, the left cornea with keratoconus. It's clear. So very fast now, I'm going to see around with asymmetry and thick corneas. This is with my original Galilei G1. Zimmer sold me the Galilei G1 serial number 1. So I had the first Galilei who went around in the world. This is still working in a city south of Brazil after I sold it. This is cases going in progression. You can see with the G1 already the yellow in the center and the formation or the initial formation of the fried egg pattern here, still with thick corneas. Now more asymmetry, more steepening, more elevation, heights, and thinning of the cornea, like here or like here, with skewed or duck pattern in the bow tie. So PMD also can be classified. It's already with Galilei G1. If you try to see a cornea against the rule, never stop in the axial map. You must go to the tangential map. Tangential map is possible to see the periphery. So you are going to see the bump at the bottom. And the bridge in the elevation Galilei map is vertical, not more horizontal. And the lump is here at the bottom. This is another case with apparently normal axial map, but in the tangential is evidently already pathologic. And you can see that the pachymetry is within normal range, but there is a thinning. The lower hemisphere is thinner than the upper hemisphere. So probably the pellucid marginal degeneration disease comes from against the rule anterior and posterior surface, and because a thinning process, originally thinning process. In keratoconus, the thinning is the consequence of the progression of the lump and the protrusion. But in pellucid, maybe just the opposite. The progression of the lump and the ectasia is consequence of the original and primary thinning of the inferior portion of the cornea. Curiously, most of post-refractive ectasia has this pattern against the rule and is not usually with the rule like in keratoconus. Keratoconus can get this pattern at the end. Pellucid gets this pattern very, very early. Keratoconus progress very early in young people. Pellucid begins to progress more and more in adults more than 30, 40 years old. So there are characteristics. Look, this kind of thick corneas with against the rule already pellucid, or here, this is the extreme case of pellucid discovered in the Galilei. This is like the point of a pencil in the cornea, and you can see the pachymetry map with an incredible thinning at the bottom. So, do we have other kind of keratoectasias? And we are finishing in a few minutes, okay? Yes, we have. And let's see them. This is keratoglobus. It's a completely steeper cornea. And you can see this with the new tangential map, okay? There is not flattening in the periphery. There is an incredible lump, 78 diopters at the center. Then there is a ring, a little flatter, and suddenly the cornea is tipped more and more. So this is a dome. This is a dome, very steep dome. This is post-operative ectasia, very similar to pellucid in many times against the rule pattern, vertical asymmetry and thinning. And this is very interesting cases, okay, because these correspond to two corneas, which theoretically at the hospital were as recidivate keratoconus after corneal transplant. And we can now differentiate what is real and new keratoconus in a transplant cornea is at the top. You can see the pattern is very similar, okay? The elevation is higher, corresponding to the thinnest point and corresponding to the highest steeper curvature, okay? This is what happened when there is a new keratoconus after transplant. However, in the bottom was also diagnosed initially as keratoconus, and this is not. This kind of pattern, observe that the steeper cornea is here around 3 hours. 3 hours, there is not thinning in the pachymetry map. At 3 hours is not more elevation in the best fit sphere maps. Okay, there is asymmetry and there is a lot of coma. What happened in this cornea? In this cornea is similar to what happened in this one. This is an extremely toric cornea after transplant, okay? And usually the pattern is this. You can see where the steeper cornea is, actually is the lower elevation, it's not highest elevation, there is not a lump, okay? And there is actually thick cornea there. So with the complete analysis of the cornea and not depending only in the anterior curvature maps, okay, we can discover that this happens when we have a step in the scar, the host and the graft junction. And this is exactly what happened in these cases. So these cases should not be treated, for example, in my opinion, with LASIK or with PRK. These cases should be treated with incisions, with trying to modify what the scar produces, treating the scar and not the surface at the center. This is another case of radial keratotomy, and we can understand that this is not keratoconus, but it's a kind of ectasia, is a ring ectasia, especially in the posterior surface, okay, that we can treat with cross-linking. So this is a summary of the values we use for the Galilei, and the Galilei G4 and G6 lens professional. Presently, we can say these devices are much more complete to any other device we have in the market, are more precise and more accurate. And of course, don't believe the marketing. They are very easy to interpret and to work with. So Galilei, in my opinion, is priceless. It's not MasterCard, it's Zimmer. Thank you very much for your attention. We got 1 hour and a half in my lecture. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I hope to have the opportunity to go more times with you.
Carlos, thank you very, very much. That was a fantastic and very educative lecture with a lot of knowledge. I already received many messages on my phone. So really, thanks a lot. I know your lecture and I always enjoy it. Now I think we have a couple of questions from the audience. And the first one is from Mariano Y. Melgar that is asking about the centration. If there is any clues to know if the capture is valid, reliable, well-centered.
Repeat the question, please, from Mariano. Mariano is a very good friend from Guatemala.
So he's asking if the capture, how can you validate that the capture is good and reliable?
Okay. The Galilei has indices of Placido, of shine flow, motion for the motion compensation, and also anterior-posterior motion of the patient. Patient during the exam have some saccadic movements. So we follow this percentage, but in different opportunity, we can show maps, for example, from pachymetry. In keratoconus, if we don't have scars, we have a very good concentric map in color steps, okay? If we begin to have elliptic or wavy borders of these steps, maybe we have the lead covering part of the cornea. Alignment is also important. If we have a large Purkinje and a very large horizontal coma, is depending of the Purkinje and fixation. We cannot ask a patient with a very deep cataract, dense cataract, to fixate. So we do the exam the best possible, but later with the exam, we align to the pupil, or the wavefront, we can align to the white to white. So we know exactly the data, because the cylinder and the axis of the cylinder may be different according to the alignment of the data. So after we begin to read more and more maps of Galilei, we began to discover, for example, when there is some extrapolation because the lead, upper lead, lower lead, or because blinking or failures during the examination.
Thanks, Carlos. He was asking as well about what would be the earliest sign of ectasia after later refractive surgery when you use the Galilei. So I will let you answer, and maybe I will add some.
The first map you have to see, the first two maps, I would say you have to see is the posterior BFS. The posterior BFS to be increased, okay? And second map is the posterior BFTA map, because the posterior began to be asymmetric. And remember, if you did a cornea with the rule astigmatism in your LASIK or your PRK, and that cornea already has against the rule astigmatism, or you did over treatment, or is beginning ectasia. There are some tips like this, okay? But I think the first map and the first sign will be how tall is the BFS maximum in the posterior BFS. You had a paper, David, showing that the posterior surface changes after refractive, but this change is temporary. I did the same paper with Orbiscan and proving exactly the same, but the reviewer of the paper didn't accept it because didn't believe in the orb scan. But you show it that, David, with the Galilei.
So that's exactly the point, Mariano. One of the things that we did, and I completely agree with Carlos, as usual, posterior surface might be the key, but what I send you the link of 2 different papers. The first one is a paper that we did, I think in 2012, showing the response of the posterior cornea using the Galilei after a different level of myopia correction. And you can see that you see 2 things. Number one, the higher the myopia you treat, the more steepening you will get at the posterior surface. But the second thing is that after a 3 months period, you will get the same posterior surface that you had preoperatively. Therefore, any patients that you see that after 3 months, you start to see that the cornea is not getting back to the initial level and it's continuously bulging and getting steeper after the surgery might be a sign of something going on there in terms of biomechanics. The second paper I sent here is something that is completely related to that in keratoconus population. We showed that we followed patients with keratoconus for more than a year, and every 3 months, and we could see that the posterior surface is changing before you can see any change on the anterior surface. So it is exactly the same thing. And this is exactly what I'm doing. For every patient during my postoperative visit, I'm always checking if the posterior cornea is going back to the normal or if it's continuously getting steeper. And if it's the case, you might see in the next visit some change starting at the anterior surface. So that might be a very important parameter to check.
I have something to add if you allow me. There are 2 important points about this. First, how many people in the audience or around the world do a topotomography after LASIK or PRK? Very few. They did the surgery, go home, and that's it. We solved the problem. I always indicate a Galilei exam, exactly as you say, 2-4 months later. And actually, I told my patient, this is for free. First post-operative, within the first 4 months, is free for you in order to convince them to come back. If not, they come 1 year, 2 years, 3 years later, and you don't have a baseline to compare with future exams. Second point, what is the posterior surface? Posterior surface is negative in curvature. So if you steep the posterior surface, you are inducing myopia. And one of the first signs of beginning ectasia is a little myopic residual in the refraction. And it happened. I don't know exactly what is the mechanism of action, but in this case with -1, even -2.5 diopter, I immediately begin with topical drops, high potentials. I used to use brimonidine and timolol, okay? And more than 80% of these corneas in 1 month or between 1 to 3 months will have the great surprise that go back to 0 or very close to plano as they were immediately after the refractive surgery. So how I do in these corneas, I continue with the topical drops and study the optical nerve, the visual field, and the daily curve of intraocular pressure. Okay, no glaucoma, perfect. You follow with the topical drops for your life. No, I don't want to go with drops. Okay, let's maintain the drops and go to cross-linking. Okay, but these corneas never go to re-enhancement treatment, retreatment, because if you retreat this cornea, you make this cornea weaker and the ectasia will be topographically, clinically evident after a while.
Thanks, Carlos. I think we have another question from Fernanda that is related more to the new software you talk about, and if you have any insight about probably using corneal biomechanics with the Galilei device.
Well, Zimmer seems not directed to study biomechanics, but I am. At the hospital, we got at the end of last year, the Corbis. So I am trying to study, beginning to study this kind of prekeratoconus corneas with Corbis. So we don't have yet the correlation, and I cannot talk anything about it, but I hope in 2 or 3 years, we are going to have some results about it. Let's see, because absolutely, these corneas I show it as prekeratoconus do not behave the same, are totally different biomechanically. So Galilei probably is not going for biomechanics, but Galilei is always improving and improving. Presently, there is already a Galilei available with the top view in color, not the top view in black and white or with fake colors, but you can take the photo of the eye in color. Okay, this is the new Galilei. It's still G4, G6. All the rest is the same. Okay, why in color? Because we needed color images in order to have the subconjunctival and the conjunctival vessels to identify exactly the position and the data from Galilei going to the femto laser, going to the Aquarius refractive solid state laser, and going to the microscopes to improve your surgery, your toric IOL implantation. Galilei G6 is coming with a Barrett formula, with optimization of the A constants, with silicone oil biometry, and with movement of the peaks in the A scan. So we can have, David, if you wish, later, the possibility to optimize the present formulas, simply knowing how much was the ELP, effective lens position, calculated by any formula, and what is the ELP, real ELP, after the surgery, because we will be able to measure it. So Galilei is always improving, but we cannot do everything, and each company decide what is the trail they want to go. And each surgeon, each professional search what is the device which fill their needs. My device is my patient. I had the first Galilei going around the world since 2008 is the Galilei. For me,
Thanks,
it's
Carlos.
still the future.
I think we have two last questions from people I know. One is from a bright resident with definitely orientation for refractive. He's asking about the Schemflug technology in the Galilei. And he's writing that Schemflug is sensitive to the media and the density of the media. And he's asking if the pachymetry measurements at 10 millimeter can be fine reliable, especially in older patients where you might have some senile arcus?
Okay, I will be infident. I'm not, I'm consultant of Zimmer. I'm not Zimmer employee. And actually, this is my project I presented to Zimmer. Many people believe that Scheimpflug technology is not enough, and we need OCT in order to get epithelial thickness. I believe this is still possible with Scheimpflug, okay? And this is already in work, okay? So if Galilei begins to have epithelial thickness, we are going to have one more weapon, one more feature to have this. About density, yes, optical density or densitometry is possible with Scheimpflug. And we can measure the density in the cornea or in the lens. And in the lens, for example, when we have more than 25% of densitometry, we already have cataract that if is at the center will disturb the quality of vision, okay? And in density scan, we also can see Fuchs dystrophy because the cornea has more density in the Bowman, producing only one peak of densitometry. The stroma produce a plateau and the aqueous humor then falls. So if we have a second peak in the endothelial side, we have what it was called camel sign, 2 hubs. And in this case, is typical of Guttata or Fuchs dystrophy. So we can use the Galilei Scheimpflug images by many things, okay? Measuring the angle, measuring the volume of the anterior chamber, measuring the depth of the anterior chamber for glaucoma. So, but in this lecture, we concentrated our attention in keratoconus and pre-refractive, as you asked me, David.
Thanks, Carlos. And the last question is from a very experienced optometrist that I know here in Israel, working mostly with laser center. He is asking if we can align topography with the Galilei to geometric center of the cornea, and if there is any benefits for it. If we can align the topography of the Galilei, the imaging, with the geometric center of the cornea and not the Purkinje, and if you think there is any benefits to it. Because he thinks that sometimes cornea looks more symmetric when it's centered on the geometric cornea. Yes,
center. I am totally agree, and this is one of the reasons the SMATJA decision tree was not validated, the alignment. And there is a practical application for this. And this is also the same reason why other devices which aligns to the apex or different points do not have the same kind of quality of maps in best fit toric ellipsoid, they call, or best fit toric aspheric maps, which should be similar. And yes, there is practical reasons. For example, after IOL implantation, if you implant a multifocal IOL with concentric diffractive rings and you see the IOL off center, with the Galilei, you can align the wavefront data exactly to the center of the IOL. Or you can see if in the line of vision, the cornea has problems in wavefront. And white to white would be the best reference for geometrical alignment. Presently, the curvature maps, the pachymetry maps can be, and the elevation maps can be aligned to the pupil, which is another geometric center, okay? Not only right, and the Purkinje. But the wavefront data from Galilei, the corneal wavefront data, probably is the only device that can be aligned to any part in the cornea, any point X, Y in the cornea. And so functionally, we can decide if the optics of the cornea is well or not, is good or not, according to the IOL implanted or to the treatment made in refractive surgery or whatever happened in the cornea. Even with rings, okay, with rings, 2 segments, many people implant the rings to the pupil because it's more cosmetic. Theoretically, it should be implanted to the Purkinje, okay? But you don't have a way to measure the wavefront in different diameters. With the Galilei, you can measure exactly the area you have within the rings. This is what happened with other kind of implants that we probably don't use anymore, the refractive implants in the cornea. You could measure exactly the quality of the cornea, the functional quality of the cornea, with the wavefront exactly in the area where the implant is. Yes,
Carlos,
there is a lot of importance, and it's possible.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your generosity and everything you share with us. You have a lot of knowledge, and it's always great to have you sharing that with us. I guess we learn a lot from this device. We'll have the recording of this beautiful presentation for anyone that needs to sit another couple of hours to review everything, and we will share it very soon. So Carlos, thanks again for your participation and for being here with us tonight. Next episode will be on another technology, another Scheimpflug technology, Panacam technology, with Renato Ambrosio and Ronald Kruger. So stay tuned, guys, and we'll soon provide the next date for the webinar. Thanks a lot, Carlos. Thank you very much.
Can I ask a question, Carlos?
Sure, Mohammed, sure.
Okay, first, thank you, David, for this very good webinar, for moderating this webinar, and thank you, Carlos, for a very good presentation. I had a question that I sent the pictures to your WhatsApp. Maybe you will look at it later on, but just this question is that how can you rely on the posterior curvature of the cornea? Because I have the case, okay, I send it to you. IL Master measured differently from I mean, the case of IL Master, the patient had 6 diopter of cylinder. I can read the data here. For example, mean K of IL Master is 56. Of course, this is anterior. And the one who sent it to me measured the posterior curvature of the cornea, total corneal curvature of Galilei, and it was 53 with no cylinder. Unfortunately, he didn't send to me the SIMCA of the Galilei, and I only have the posterior. So is it possible that you have anterior corneal curvature with a high cylinder in IL Master and also topography with a spherical only total corneal power? Is that possible?
Okay, the first point I will comment very fast. IL Master cannot see curvature very well in the posterior surface. So it cannot produce maps. So if you send me the Galilei exam of that patient, I will comment.
Okay, I will talk to you later.
Thank you very much for that. And I want to say that I want to thank everybody, people from Guatemala, from Brazil, from United States, Johan Kruger from South Africa, Xavi Fructuoso from Spain, and many people I can recognize these friends, not only from Israel, from Iran, and from other countries. Thank you very much for this opportunity, David. And I hope to be again next time to talk about biometry and axial length and other application of the Galilei G6. I hope you wish to.
Thank you. Just David, I have a question that's not related to this subject. Can I ask it from you?
Sure, of course.
What is this?
Better send by WhatsApp, because
you can stop recording.
2 minutes and a half in order to get the 2 hours webinar.
Okay.
We have only 2 minutes. If you can answer that question, quickly. David, please answer Muhammad.
Okay, what is the status of refractive index change that you're working on that? Clinically, there is not, you know, any new news from the refractive index change? You know,
there is a refractive index change after refractive surgery. The cornea.
No, I am asking from David.
Okay, you are talking about the eye drops for changing the refractive index, right?
What is the status of that?
Yeah, it's we are planning to start, I hope very soon, the first in-human study early next year.
Okay.
So I really hope to communicate probably over the course of next year about this outcome, but it goes pretty well now.
Okay,
thank you for asking.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very well. Carlos, thanks a lot. You're always welcome.
Good night.